The first message lit up my screen before the plane even left the tarmac. A single line in the family group chat, a lifeline I'd thrown out into the void, hoping someone would catch it. They didn't. They let it fall. My name is Hannah Collins and I am 33 years old. For years, I was the forgotten daughter, the silent wife, the responsible one who never asked for anything. I built my life on a foundation of quiet strength, but in one afternoon, my own family tried to demolish it. They thought I would crumble. They had no idea what I was truly made of. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. The funeral was in Germany. A small, sterile ceremony on a U.S. military base, 1,000 miles from anything that felt like home. 21 guns fired a salute that cracked the sky open. A meticulously folded American flag was pressed into my trembling hands. I watched them lower my husband's casket into foreign soil, and a part of me went into the ground with him. Mark was gone. The world had tilted on its axis, and I was sliding off. The flight home was a blur of sympathetic glances from flight attendants and the low, constant hum of the engines. I was suspended in a metal tube, somewhere between the life I had and the life I was supposed to live now. I hadn't slept in days. Grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. All I wanted was to be home. All I wanted was my family. My fingers felt clumsy as I pulled out my phone. I navigated to the group chat named Collins Clan. The last message was from 3 weeks ago, a picture of my brother's new grill. Everyone had replied with fire emojis and jokes about steaks. My life had ended since then, but their world had kept spinning. I typed out the simplest of messages. A flare sent up in the dark. Flight lands at 3 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I stared at the words. They looked so small, so pathetic. I was a widow coming home from her husband's funeral. I shouldn't have to ask. They should have been calling me, tracking my flight, waiting at the gate. But they weren't. So I asked, I hit send. The message appeared with a soft swoosh, a blue bubble in a sea of forgotten conversations. I waited, my thumb hovering over the screen. 1 minute passed, then 2. My heart pounded a dull, anxious rhythm against my ribs. Then, the 3 little dots appeared. My brother Ethan was typing. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. He was going to say yes. Of course he would. The message popped up. We're busy. Try Uber. I read it once, then twice. The words didn't compute. Busy? Busy doing what? Grilling steaks? It felt like a slap. Sharp, stinging, and utterly unexpected. My vision blurred. I felt the hot sting of tears, but they wouldn't fall. I was too numb. Try Uber. Like I was a stranger asking for a favor. Like my world hadn't just been obliterated. Before I could even process the cruelty of his reply, the dots appeared again. This time it was my mother, my mom. Surely she would fix this. She would scold him for being so callous. She would tell me she was on our way. Hope is a stubborn, foolish thing. Her message was even worse. Why didn't you plan better? And there it was. Not comfort. Not sympathy. A question. An accusation. As if my husband's death was an inconvenience I had failed to properly schedule. As if my grief was a personal failing, a lack of organizational skills. I had just watched them bury the love of my life, and my mother was asking me why I hadn't booked a car service. The coldness of it was breathtaking. It was a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs, leaving me gasping in the silent, pressurized cabin. I dropped the phone into my lap as if it had burned my hand. The screen glowed with their casual dismissal, a monument to my loneliness. The plane began to taxi, and with a lurch it started its journey home. I was going home, but for the first time in my life, I realized I had nowhere to go. The plane finally leveled out, a gentle dip of the wings signaling we had reached our cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin stirred with the mundane sounds of life continuing. The rustle of a magazine, the soft murmur of a conversation, the click of a laptop opening. For everyone else, this was just a Tuesday. For me, it was the first day of a life I didn't want. I remained motionless, my forehead pressed against the cold acrylic of the window, the vibrations of the engine a dull hum that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. Outside, the world was a serene landscape of impossible blues and blinding whites, a beautiful empty expanse. It was a perfect mirror for the hollowness that had opened up inside my chest. My phone lay dark in my lap. I didn't need to look at it. The words were branded onto the inside of my eyelids. We're busy. Try Uber. Why didn't you plan better? Each word was a stone, and together they formed a wall between me and the family I thought I had. I tried to dissect them, to find a different meaning, a misunderstanding. Maybe busy meant they were handling some kind of emergency, a logical, rational part of my brain, a part that was flickering like a dying candle, tried to make excuses. But I knew better. Their kind of busy wasn't an emergency. It was a choice. It was golf games and shopping trips and long lunches. It was a life that had no room for my grief, a memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the numbness. It was from when I was 7 years old. I had been climbing the old oak tree in our backyard, trying to impress Ethan, who was watching from the porch with a bored expression. My foot slipped. I tumbled down, landing hard on my arm. A sharp cracking sound was followed by a pain so white-hot it stole my breath. I lay on the grass, cradling my arm and sobbing. Ethan didn't move. He just stared, then went back inside. My mother came out a few minutes later, not because she heard me cry, but because it was time for dinner. She looked down at me, her face a mask of annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Hannah, what is it now? You're always so dramatic." She'd grabbed my good arm and pulled me to my feet, telling me to walk it off. The doctor later confirmed my arm was broken in 2 places. Even then, the lesson was clear. My pain was an inconvenience. My needs were drama. The flight attendant from earlier returned. Her expression softened with concern. "Ma'am," she said gently, "are you sure I can't get you something? Some tea, maybe?" I looked up at her, and I think she saw the full, undiluted devastation in my eyes. I was a shipwreck, and she was a lone sailor witnessing the wreckage. I managed a small shake of my head. My throat was too tight to speak. "My husband," I started to say, the words catching like burrs. "He was a soldier." Her professional composure cracked. The pity in her eyes was genuine now. "I am so sorry for your loss," she whispered. Her voice was thick with an empathy my own mother's text had completely lacked. A stranger on an airplane had shown me more compassion in 5 seconds than my family had in 33 years. She discreetly left a small packet of premium cookies next to the water bottle and retreated, giving me the space I didn't even know how to ask for. I stared out the window again, watching the clouds drift by. They looked solid, like you could walk on them, a pristine heavenly landscape. I thought of Mark. I wondered where he was. Was he up here somewhere in this impossible blue? Was he watching me? The thought brought a fresh wave of agony. What would he think of this? Mark, who believed so fiercely in the inherent goodness of people. Mark, who had always encouraged me to mend bridges with my family. "They're your blood, hon," he used to say, his voice full of a conviction I could never share. "You only get one family. You can't give up on them." He had been wrong. You can have no family at all, even when they're all still alive. My mind started to spiral, replaying every interaction, every dismissal, every moment I had been made to feel small. I remembered the time I'd been terribly sick with the flu in college. I was living in a dorm 2 hours away from home. I called my mom, my voice hoarse, my body aching, and asked if she could possibly come get me, or at least bring me some medicine. "Hannah, you're an adult now," she'd said, her tone brisk. "You need to learn to take care of yourself. Besides, Ethan has a big soccer tournament this weekend, and we can't miss it." I spent the next 3 days alone, shivering with fever, subsisting on vending machine crackers. Ethan's team lost in the first round. My suffering had been for nothing. Each memory was a confirmation, another piece of evidence in a case I hadn't realized I was building against them. I had spent my life on the periphery of their world. I was the responsible one, the self-sufficient one, the one who never needed anything, and I had played my part perfectly. I had been so capable, so independent, that I had made it easy for them to forget me. I had built my own cage of competence, and they had gladly locked the door. The man in the seat across the aisle laughed at something on his tablet. A woman 2 rows ahead was cooing at a baby. Life was moving forward all around me, a current pulling everyone else along while I was trapped in a stagnant, silent eddy of pain. The hollowness inside me began to fill with something cold and heavy. It felt like steel. It was the slow, dawning realization that I was completely and utterly on my own. The safety net was gone. The illusion had shattered. There was no one coming to rescue me. The thought should have terrified me. It should have sent me into a blind panic. But as the plane carried me closer to a home that was no longer a home, and a family that was no longer a family, I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange, chilling clarity. It was the clarity that comes from hitting rock bottom. There's nowhere left to fall. There is only up 8 years. For 8 years, my life had been a masterclass in waiting. Waiting for phone calls that came at 3 a.m. Waiting for 2-week leaves that felt like 2 days. Waiting for the end of deployments that stretched into eternity. The life of a military spouse is a paradox. You are part of a massive, supportive community, yet you experience a profound and unique loneliness that no one else can truly understand. It's a silence that becomes your most constant companion. Our first year of marriage was a whirlwind. Mark was stationed stateside, and we lived in a tiny apartment off base. It was the most normal, most beautiful year of my life. We cooked dinner together, argued about which movie to watch, and fell asleep holding hands. It was simple and real, but we both knew it was temporary. The shadow of his first deployment loomed over everything. The day he left is seared into my memory. We stood on a gray, windswept tarmac, surrounded by other couples clinging to each other. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and unspoken fears. He held my face in his hands, his eyes searching mine. "It's just a year, Han," he whispered, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "I'll be back before you know it. Be strong." He kissed me one last time, a desperate, hurried press of his lips, and then he turned and walked away, merging into a sea of green uniforms. I stood there until his plane was just a silver speck in the sky, a knot of pure ice forming in the pit of my stomach. That was the day the silence began. The apartment felt cavernous without him. His scent lingered on his pillow for a week, and I would bury my face in it, trying to hold on to a piece of him. I went to work, I paid the bills, I grocery shopped, I performed the functions of a normal life, but I felt like a ghost haunting my own home. My family's reaction to this first deployment set the tone for all the years to come. I called my mother, crying, the night after he left. "I just feel so alone," I told her. Her response was immediate and practical. "Well, you knew what you were signing up for," she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "This is no time to fall apart, Hannah. You need to keep busy. Keep busy." That became my mantra. I poured myself into my work as a project manager for a construction company. I took extra shifts, volunteered for difficult projects, and worked late. The exhaustion was a welcome anesthetic, a way to numb the constant low-grade anxiety that hummed just beneath the surface of my skin. Anniversaries were the worst. For our second, I baked a small cake, lit 2 candles, and set a place for him at our tiny kitchen table. We had a video call scheduled. He appeared on my laptop screen, his face pixelated and tired, the sounds of the barracks loud behind him. I held up the cake and he smiled, a sad, distant smile. "Happy anniversary, beautiful," he said, his voice crackling. We talked for 15 minutes before the connection failed. I sat there for another hour, staring at his empty chair, the untouched slice of cake a monument to our separation. The fear was a constant companion. Every news report about an IED, every headline about an attack, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. In his 4th year of service, there was an incident at his forward operating base. The news was vague, reporting casualties but no names. For 48 hours, there was silence. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just sat by the phone, my body rigid with dread, jumping every time it rang. I called my dad, desperate for a voice of comfort, of paternal strength. "Dad, I'm so scared," I sobbed into the phone. "I haven't heard from him." There was a long pause. "Hannah," he finally said, his voice flat and weary as if my call was an interruption. "He's a soldier. This is his job. Panicking doesn't help anyone. Call us when you have actual news." Actual news. My terror wasn't real enough. It was a hypothetical problem, an emotional overreaction. It was only actual if he was dead. The call ended, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear for Mark. It was the chilling realization of my father's emotional distance. He wasn't a rock I could cling to in a storm. He was a distant cliffside, impassive and unreachable. Mark finally called 2 days later. His unit had been hit, but he was okay. His voice was shaky, and I knew he was leaving out the worst details to protect me. The relief was so overwhelming it made me sick. After I hung up, I didn't call my family to tell them the good news. I knew it wouldn't matter. This was the life they never saw, the one they refused to acknowledge. They saw my independence and called it strength, but it was a survival mechanism. They saw my solitude and called it my choice. They never understood that every day was a battle, a quiet internal war against fear and loneliness. I fought that war alone because I had learned time and time again that there were no reinforcements coming from home. My family wasn't a sanctuary. It was just the place I was from. Mark was my home, and with him gone, I was not just a widow. I was homeless. The dynamic in my family wasn't born from a single dramatic event. It was a slow-growing cancer, 1,000 tiny instances of neglect and favoritism that, over decades, metastasized into the cold, unfeeling organism it was today. To understand the cruelty of those text messages, you have to see the soil they grew in, a ground tilled for 30 years with disregard for me and reverence for my brother. One of the most vivid examples comes from when I was 12. I had always loved science, the order and logic of it a comfort in my chaotic emotional world. I spent 3 months working on a project for the district science fair, a detailed model of a volcanic eruption. complete with chemical reactions that produced smoke and a slow-moving, viscous lava. I poured everything I had into it. I spent my allowance on supplies, stayed up late reading geology books, and painstakingly painted the miniature landscape. I was proud of it. More than that, I was hopeful. I thought, this is it. This is something they can't ignore. I won first place. My name was called, and I walked onto the stage of the school auditorium, my heart pounding. The principal handed me a large blue ribbon and a certificate. I scanned the audience, a hopeful smile on my face, searching for my parents. The seats where they were supposed to be were empty. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, had given me a ride. On the way home, she tried to fill the silence. Your parents must be so proud, Hannah. First place is a big deal. I just nodded, staring out the window, the blue ribbon feeling like a lead weight in my hand. When I got home, I found my parents in the living room laughing with my brother. A new video game console was set up on the floor. Where were you? I asked, my voice small. My mother looked up, her expression distracted. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Ethan's soccer team had an end-of-season pizza party, and we just couldn't miss it. You understand? I didn't understand. His pizza party was mandatory. My first-place win was optional. I held up the ribbon. I won, I said. My father glanced at it. That's nice, honey. Good job. He then turned back to Ethan, coaching him on the video game. I went to my room, pinned the ribbon to my corkboard, and cried. It was the first time I understood that my achievements would never weigh as much as my brother's amusement. The pattern solidified as we got older. When it came time for college, my path was clear. I had the grades for a scholarship, and it was expected that I would get one. I applied to the state university, was accepted, and received a full academic ride. I announced it at the dinner table one night. I got a full scholarship, I said, a tremor of excitement in my voice. My father nodded, a thin smile on his face. Excellent, he said. We knew you could do it. That's a lot of money saved. It wasn't about my success. It was about their financial relief. There was no celebration, no toast, no excitement. It was a transaction. My hard work had paid off for them. A month later, a thick envelope arrived for Ethan from the local community college. It was an acceptance letter. That night, my mother cooked a special dinner. My father opened a bottle of champagne. They toasted Ethan, their voices swelling with pride. To our boy, my dad said, raising his glass. Getting out there and starting his future. Ethan had a 2.3 GPA and had to take remedial math. I had a 4.0 and a full scholarship, but he was the one being celebrated. His bare minimum effort was a triumph. My years of dedication were just an expectation met. The injustice of it was so blatant, so shameless, that it left me breathless. I sat there sipping my water, a silent spectator at my own erasure. The exploitation became financial as I entered adulthood. Mark and I were careful with our money. We were saving for a house, for a future, but I was still tethered to them by a sense of misplaced duty. The call about the leaky roof was the most egregious example. My mother's voice on the phone was a performance of masterful helplessness. Hannah, I hate to even ask, she'd begun, but this storm really did a number on the roof. The water is coming into the attic. Your father is so stressed, and with Ethan trying to get his new business off the ground, we just don't have the $5,000 for the repairs. Her words were carefully chosen, painting a picture of a family in crisis. I felt a pang of guilt and a surge of my old programmed responsibility. I transferred the money that afternoon. 2 months passed. I called to ask how the roof was holding up. Oh, it's fine, dear. Just fine, she said quickly, changing the subject. A week later, Ethan tagged her in a photo on Instagram. He was grinning, perched on a brand new gleaming red jet ski, the lake sparkling behind him. The caption read, "Couldn't have done it without the best parents in the world. Thanks for believing in my business and getting me the gear I need to network. Entrepreneur lake life." My blood ran cold. I zoomed in on the photo. It wasn't just the jet ski. He was wearing designer sunglasses and board shorts that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I called my mother, my voice shaking with a rage I rarely allowed myself to feel. "The money," I said, no preamble. "The $5,000. It was for the jet ski, wasn't it?" There was a sigh on the other end. "Hannah, you're being so dramatic. We were going to fix the roof, but an incredible business opportunity came up for Ethan. He needed to be able to take potential clients out on the lake. It's an investment in his future. You should be happy for your brother." The gaslighting was so profound, so complete, that I felt dizzy. My money, earned through my hard work and my husband's sacrifice, had been funneled directly into my brother's latest fantasy, and I was being painted as the villain for questioning it. I was the unsupportive sister, the dramatic daughter. It was in that moment that I truly understood. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource. A well they could draw from whenever they were thirsty, a well they never felt any need to replenish. The captain's voice, smooth and standardized, announced our final approach. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." The words echoed in the quiet space of the plane, each one a hammer blow counting down the seconds until I had to face the world. A world without Mark, a world where my family had made it clear I was an inconvenience. As the plane banked, the sprawling grid of the city came into view, a glittering tapestry of lights against the encroaching dusk. For everyone else, it was a homecoming. For me, it was a final destination, the end of a line. This feeling, this crushing weight of betrayal, was heavier than my grief for Mark, because it was a different kind of loss. Grief, for all its savage pain, is a clean wound. It's born of love. The depth of my sorrow was a measure of the depth of my love for my husband. I could cry for him. I could honor his memory. I could hold on to the beautiful, pure thing we had. Our love was a story with a tragic ending, but the story itself was good and true. The pain was a testament to that truth. The betrayal, however, was a sickness. It was a poison that seeped into everything, tainting every memory, every assumption I'd ever had about my life. It wasn't born of love. It was born of its absence. It didn't just break my heart. It made me doubt that the love I thought was there had ever existed at all. It was the loss of my past and my future simultaneously. It took the entire foundation of my life, the simple belief that family will be there for you, and turned it to dust. How do you mourn something that was never real to begin with? I tortured myself by imagining a different reality. I pictured my phone lighting up with a call, not a text. My dad's voice, gruff but solid. "We're at the cell phone lot, Hannah. Call us when you get your bag. We'll be right there." I imagined my mom's voice, full of a warmth I'd rarely heard. "I made your favorite soup. It'll be warm when you get home. Just come home." I imagined Ethan, for once in his life, being a brother. "Don't worry about anything, Han. I'll get your luggage. We've got you." These fantasies were so vivid, so close to what should have been, that they felt like real memories from an alternate life. The contrast between that imagined world and my cold reality was a chasm I was falling into. With no bottom in sight, the plane's wheels screeched against the tarmac, the shuddering impact a violent return to the present. We were here. The engines whined down, and the familiar rush of people grabbing their bags began. I remained in my seat, a statue in a river of motion. I watched a young woman a few rows ahead of me excitedly text someone. "Just landed. See you in a minute." A father across the aisle was explaining to his young son, "Grandma and Grandpa are going to be waiting right outside." Every snippet of conversation was a reminder of what I didn't have. Every happy face was a reflection of my own despair. Finally, I forced my legs to move. I pulled my small carry-on from the overhead bin and joined the slow-moving queue of passengers shuffling toward the exit. The flight attendant stood by the door, offering tired smiles and, "Have a nice day." The one who had been kind to me met my eyes. She didn't offer a platitude. She just gave me a small, sad nod of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the journey I was on. Stepping out of the jet bridge and into the terminal was like stepping into another dimension. The airport was a cacophony of joyful reunions. People were hugging, kissing, crying happy tears. A little girl shrieked, "Daddy!" and ran into the arms of a man in uniform. A scene so painfully similar to the ones I had dreamed of for Mark that I had to physically turn away, a sob catching in my throat. I felt utterly invisible, a ghost drifting through a celebration I wasn't invited to. Each happy family was a fresh stab of pain, a billboard advertising my own isolation. I didn't head toward the baggage claim. I had only one small bag. There was no need to wait. There was no one to wait with. I walked through the sliding glass doors and out into the cool evening air. The city smelled of exhaust fumes and rain. Cars were lined up at the curb, doors opening and closing, loved ones finding each other in the organized chaos. And there I stood, on the edge of the sidewalk, a widow in a strange new world. My grief for Mark was a storm raging inside me, but the betrayal from my family was the cold, empty silence after the storm. A silence that confirmed I would have to rebuild everything, brick by painful brick, completely on my own. It wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of my childhood, the end of my faith in the people who were supposed to be my beginning and my end. It was the final, irrevocable proof that I was alone. I stood on the concrete curb, a solitary island in a river of happy reunions. The evening air was damp and cool, carrying the scent of asphalt and jet fuel. My small carry-on bag was at my feet, containing all that was left of my life from before. For what felt like an eternity, I simply stood there, watching the taillights of cars blur into red streaks as they pulled away from the curb, each one carrying people to a place they called home. My own home felt a million miles away. My own family, a million years away. The finality of my isolation was setting in, a cold, hard fact. I watched a young woman leap into the arms of a man who swung her around, their laughter echoing in the noisy space. A few feet away, an elderly couple was being helped into a car by their middle-aged son, his movements gentle and full of care. Every normal, beautiful interaction was a grain of salt being rubbed into my open wound. There was nothing left to do. The hope I had foolishly clung to on the plane, the faint, dying ember that whispered, maybe they'll change their minds, was finally extinguished. They weren't coming. I had to call an Uber. I had to take care of myself, just like they had always expected me to do. It was the story of my life, distilled into one brutal moment. My hand trembled as I reached into my purse for my phone. The screen felt cold and heavy, a slab of glass that had delivered the verdict on my worth to my family. I unlocked it, my thumb instinctively hovering over the group chat icon, a morbid curiosity tempting me to see if my father had ever bothered to reply. I resisted. There was no point. I opened the rideshare app, its familiar map loading with a painful slowness. The little icon showing my location pulsed on the screen. You are here. Yes, I was. Here. Alone. A few animated cars swirled around the map just minutes away. All I had to do was press a button. It felt like a final act of surrender, an acceptance of their terms. Fine, a voice in my head whispered. You win. I'll get an Uber. As my thumb descended toward the confirm pickup button, a vehicle pulled up silently in front of me, its movement so smooth and quiet it seemed to absorb the sound around it. It was a long, black SUV with tinted windows and government plates, out of place amongst the minivans and sedans, its presence commanding a quiet authority. It stopped directly where I was standing, the engine a low, almost imperceptible hum. I froze, assuming it was for some dignitary, and prepared to move out of the way, to drag my bag further down the curb. But the passenger side window glided down with a soft whir. Inside sat a man in a crisp, immaculate Marine Corps dress uniform. He looked to be in his late 40s, his face etched with the serious, steady lines of a career officer. He had kind, tired eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen too much but hadn't become cynical. He looked at me, a flicker of recognition, of profound sympathy in his gaze. Mrs. Collins? He asked, his voice calm and respectful. It was a voice accustomed to command, but he spoke to me with a gentleness that felt like a balm on my raw nerves. I was so startled that I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight. I had no idea who he was. I'm Major Thompson, he said. I was your husband's battalion commander. Mark was a fine man, one of the best. He talked about you all the time. He paused, letting the words settle. We're here for you. We're here for you. The 4 simplest words in the English language. Words I had desperately needed to hear all day. They came not from my mother or my father, but from a stranger who had known my husband in a world of sand and service that I could barely imagine. And he had brought a piece of Mark with him. The knowledge that he had spoken of me, that I had been present in his life even when we were a world apart. As he spoke, the back door of the SUV opened. A young Marine, no older than 20, stepped out. He was ramrod straight, his expression solemn, his movements precise and economical. He didn't say a word. He simply took the handle of my carry-on bag from the ground. He opened the other rear door for me, holding it as if I were a visiting head of state. As I moved to get in, I saw 2 other Marines standing at attention by the vehicle. They were in full dress uniform, their white hats and gloves a stark, luminous white against the deepening twilight. They weren't looking at me with pity, the way the flight attendant had. They were looking at me with a profound, unwavering respect. One of them, a young corporal with a jawline that looked like it was carved from stone, met my eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that brief glance, I saw a universe of shared loss and silent solidarity. They weren't seeing a burden or an inconvenience. They were seeing the widow of one of their own, a man they considered a brother. They were seeing a part of their fallen family that needed to be brought home. I slid onto the cool leather of the back seat. The door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, shutting out the noise and chaos of the airport. The silence inside the vehicle was absolute. It was a sanctuary. The air smelled faintly of leather and clean polish. It was a world away from the stale, recycled air of the airplane. Major Thompson turned slightly in his seat. We've arranged a room for you at a hotel downtown for as long as you need it, Mrs. Collins, he said quietly. There's no rush on anything. We just want you to have a safe, quiet place to land. We've also assigned a casualty assistance officer to help you with the paperwork and benefits when you're ready. Her name is Captain Eva Rostova. She'll meet you tomorrow morning, or whenever you feel up to it. Tonight we just wanted to make sure you weren't alone. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a ragged whisper. Thank you. It was all I could manage. The words felt inadequate, a pebble of gratitude offered in the face of a mountain of kindness. It is our honor, he replied simply, and the sincerity in his voice was absolute. Mark saved 3 men from my command. We don't forget that. We don't forget our own. The young Marine got back in the vehicle, and the SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic. I looked out the tinted window, watching the terminal lights recede. I wasn't crying. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. My family had cast me out. They had told me to find my own way home. And in their absence, a different family had appeared. A family born not of blood, but of honor, duty, and a shared, unspoken sacrifice. This was the brotherhood Mark had told me about, the one I never truly understood until now. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a living, breathing thing. And in that quiet, dark vehicle, surrounded by the silent, steadfast presence of my husband's brothers in arms, I realized my journey home was just beginning. The hotel room was spacious and impersonal, decorated in muted shades of gray and beige. It was a suite, with a small living area and a separate bedroom. From the massive window, the city sprawled out below, a glittering tapestry of lights against the inky blackness of the night sky. It was beautiful, but its beauty felt distant, like a painting in a museum. Major Thompson and the other Marines had escorted me all the way to the door, carrying my bag. The young corporal had set it gently inside, and they had all stood for a moment in the hallway. If you need anything, Mrs. Collins, anything at all, you have my number, Major Thompson had said, pressing a business card into my hand. Don't hesitate. Then they were gone, their footsteps receding down the carpeted hall, leaving me in a silence that felt both vast and safe. I didn't unpack. I left my bag by the door as if I were a temporary guest in my own life. I drifted through the suite, my hand trailing along the back of the sofa, the smooth, cool surface of the dining table. I went into the bedroom. The king-sized bed was perfectly made, a sea of white linens and plush pillows, a bed big enough for 2 people. I backed out of the room and closed the door. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep in it. I went into the bathroom. It was all marble and chrome, with a stack of fluffy white towels and a row of tiny, expensive-smelling soaps. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. There were dark circles beneath them that looked like bruises. I looked like a ghost. I returned to the living area and collapsed into a large, comfortable armchair, curling my legs up underneath me. For hours, I just sat there, watching the city breathe, the flow of headlights on the highways below a constant, mesmerizing river. I thought about calling a friend, my college roommate maybe. But what would I say? How could I even begin to explain the dual heartbreak of the past week? The words were a tangled knot in my throat. The thought of speaking them aloud, of giving voice to the sheer scale of the abandonment, felt like a betrayal of some strange, new survival instinct. To speak it would be to make it even more real. So I sat in silence. Eventually, the silence became too loud. I reached for the remote and turned on the television, keeping the volume low. I needed a distraction, a mindless noise to fill the crushing emptiness of the room. I flipped through channels, a sitcom with a jarringly loud laugh track, a game show with flashing lights and frenzied contestants, a cooking competition where people were crying over fallen cakes. It was all noise from a different planet, a world where people's biggest problems were trivial and easily solved in under an hour. I finally settled on the local late-night news. The anchor's measured professional voice a soothing, meaningless drone. They were recapping the day's events, a city council vote, a traffic snarl on the interstate, a feature on a local animal shelter. I was only half listening, my gaze fixed on the cityscape outside, when a familiar image flashed on the screen. It was the arrivals terminal at the airport. My airport, in a poignant moment at the international terminal today, the news anchor said, her voice softening with practiced solemnity, a reminder of the sacrifices our local military families make every day. My breath caught in my throat. On the screen was footage of me. It was shaky, clearly taken from a distance by a news camera, but it was unmistakably me, standing on the curb, a lone figure against the backdrop of bustling activity. The camera zoomed in on my face and I saw a woman I barely recognized, pale, lost, her eyes wide with a pain so deep it seemed to swallow all the light around her. Then, the footage showed the black SUV pulling up, the Marines stepping out with their disciplined grace. It showed one of them taking my bag, another opening my door. The camera lingered on my face as I got into the vehicle, my shoulders slumped, clutching the folded American flag that I hadn't even realized was still in my arms. It was a tangible piece of Mark, the last thing of his I had, and I had been holding on to it like a lifeline. Hannah Collins, the widow of Marine Staff Sergeant Mark Collins, who was killed in action last week, arrived home today, the anchor continued. In a world of joyful reunions, hers was a quiet, solemn one, supported not by her family, but by her late husband's unit. My heart pounded against my ribs. My private, humiliating moment was now public. A hot flush of shame washed over me. But it was quickly replaced by something else. Something I couldn't name. The anchor looked down at her papers. A military public affairs officer, when asked for a statement, provided a handwritten note from Mrs. Collins herself. It's a powerful message for anyone who has ever faced hardship alone. The memory surfaced through the fog, sharp and clear now. In the quiet of the SUV, as we drove away from the airport, Major Thompson had gently mentioned that a local news crew had been there covering another story, but had seen our arrival. He had asked very quietly if I wanted to say anything. "You absolutely don't have to, Mrs. Collins," he'd assured me. "Your privacy is our top priority. But sometimes it helps to own the story, so no one else can." He had handed me a small, leather-bound notepad and a pen from the glove compartment. I remember staring at the blank, cream-colored page. What was there to say? My family abandoned me? My brother is a monster? My mother doesn't love me? No, those words were too raw, too angry. They were the words of a victim. And in that moment, I had felt the first stirrings of something other than victimhood. I had wanted to speak not of their failure, but of the honor of the men who had stepped into the void they had left. I remember writing down the one thought that had crystallized in my mind in that moment of quiet transition, the one truth I had learned that day. On the television screen, an image of my note appeared. My own handwriting, scrawled on the notepad paper, was displayed for the entire city to see. The reporter read my words aloud, her voice clear and steady. "If you stand alone in grief, don't look for those who left you there. Look for the ones who show up anyway." The screen cut back to the anchor, her expression somber. "A powerful reminder of the meaning of community and sacrifice," she concluded. "Our hearts go out to the Collins family tonight." I stared at the television, my mind reeling. My private moment of profound abandonment had been broadcast to the world. A part of me felt violated, exposed, but another stronger part of me felt seen, truly seen for the first time. The story wasn't sensationalized. It was told with dignity and respect. My pain hadn't been used as entertainment. It had been used to illustrate a larger point about honor and community. My one sentence, written in a daze of grief and clarity, had become a public statement. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't accused. I had simply told the truth, and now the whole city knew it. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying over the keyboard, and searched for the news station's website. There it was, the lead story. I clicked on it and scrolled down to the comments section. They were already flooding in. "God bless this woman and her husband. This is what honor looks like." And then, the first one that made my breath catch. What kind of family leaves a war widow at the airport? The tide was turning. I hadn't started a war, but I was no longer the only one fighting. The story didn't just air, it detonated. The local news segment was clipped and shared on social media, a digital wildfire that swept through community groups and veterans forums with astonishing speed. My name, my face, and my handwritten words became a symbol overnight, a symbol of quiet strength, but also a stark indictment of the family that had failed me so spectacularly. From the strange, sterile safety of my hotel room, I became a disconnected observer of the complete and utter implosion of my family's carefully curated life. I could picture the first tremor of the earthquake hitting my mother's kitchen. Carol would be in her usual evening routine, sipping a cup of chamomile tea and scrolling through Facebook on her iPad, her lips pursed in judgment at a neighbor's questionable garden gnomes. She would see a post shared by her sister, my Aunt Susan. The headline would be blunt: "Local Marine widow abandoned by family at airport." She would click, her initial reaction a flicker of annoyance. "Oh, Hannah, always so dramatic." Then she would watch the footage. She would see me, her daughter, looking like a hollowed-out shell of a person on the curb. She would see the solemn dignity of the Marines. And then she would hear my words, read by the anchor, followed by the anchor's sympathetic sign-off to the Collins family. Her blood would run cold. The report didn't name them, but it didn't have to. Everyone they knew would know. Her immediate instinct, the one honed over a lifetime of image management, would be to control the narrative. I could see her fingers flying across the iPad screen, her mind racing to perform damage control. She would find a photo of us from years ago, a forced smile family portrait from a Christmas where I felt like a stranger. Her caption would be a masterpiece of passive-aggressive martyrdom. So proud of our brave daughter Hannah. During this unimaginable time, we are holding her close in our hearts and prayers. Family is what matters most. She would post it, then sit back, satisfied that she had corrected the public record. But the internet is not a polite society dinner party. It is a court of public opinion with no rules of evidence. The comments under her post would start as a trickle, then become a flood, a tsunami of public condemnation. I know, because I watched it happen. I found her post within minutes. The first comment was from a woman I didn't know. Family above all? Then why didn't you pick her up? The second, I saw the news. You told her to get an Uber, shame on you. Then they came faster and faster. Holding her close? She was standing alone at the airport after burying her husband. Your hypocrisy is disgusting. My son is a Marine. If my daughter-in-law ever came home like that, I'd crawl on my hands and knees to be there for her. What is wrong with you people? My mother's attempt to build a seawall had only attracted the hurricane. Meanwhile, across town, the second shockwave would be hitting my brother. I pictured Ethan in his messy apartment, backlit by the glow of his massive TV, a video game controller in his hands. His phone would buzz incessantly on the coffee table, but he'd ignore it, absorbed in his digital world. Finally, a text from his best friend would break through. Dude, WTF? Is this your sister? You guys are getting roasted online? He would watch the clip, a smirk of annoyance on his face, until he grasped the scale of the backlash. His carefully constructed social media persona, the cool, successful entrepreneur, was being carpet-bombed. Strangers were finding his profile, leaving comments on his pictures of jet skis and expensive dinners. Is this what you were too busy to miss? Hope that steak was good while your widowed sister was stranded. His entire brand was built on a foundation of effortless charm, and now he was being exposed as a callous, self-absorbed leech. I could almost feel his panic through the screen, the frantic energy of a narcissist whose public image was shattering. And finally, my father. I pictured him in his worn leather armchair in the den, the television murmuring in the background. He would see the report, and his reaction would be the most telling of all, a profound, heavy silence. His jaw would tighten, his knuckles would be white on the armrest. He wouldn't yell, he wouldn't panic. He would just absorb the blow, the full weight of his public shaming. And then the phone would ring. It would be his older brother, my Uncle Jack, a proud Vietnam veteran. I can imagine the conversation, the words crackling with a lifetime of fraternal tension. Richard? Jack, I saw the news. Tell me it's not true. My father would try to deflect, to minimize. It's a misunderstanding, Jack. The media is blowing it all out of proportion. But Uncle Jack wouldn't have it. A misunderstanding? Your daughter, a war widow, is standing on a curb while strangers in uniform do your job for you? The whole family is calling each other. We're ashamed, Richard. Ashamed. That would be the beginning of the end for them. The social fabric of their lives would unravel. Thread by thread, friends they had known for decades would cross the street to avoid them. The invitations to neighborhood parties and golf games would dry up. Their church pastor would call to have a talk. Their carefully constructed world of suburban respectability was a house of cards, and a single sentence of truth had been the gust of wind that brought it all down. Their excuses, the ones they likely tried to make to each other in the privacy of their silent, shame-filled house. It was a misunderstanding. Hannah is just very independent. She didn't give us enough notice, crumbled into dust against the stark, simple video evidence. They had exiled me, but in the end, they were the ones left utterly, completely alone. I never answered their frantic, panicked phone calls. They started the day after the story broke and continued for a week, a relentless barrage of attempts to breach the wall of silence I had erected. Their numbers would flash on my screen, Mom, Dad, Ethan, and I would just watch the phone vibrate on the hotel nightstand until it went to voicemail. I listened to the messages once, out of a morbid clinical curiosity. They were a predictable, pathetic symphony of self-interest. Hannah, it's your mother. You need to call us immediately. The first one began, her voice strained and high-pitched. People have the completely wrong idea. This has been a nightmare for us. You need to make a statement and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. You're letting them tear our family apart. Ethan's was next. Han, seriously? You couldn't have just called me back? Now my business partners are seeing this stuff online. You're making me look like a jerk. You owe me an apology. My father's was the last, and the shortest. Hannah, your mother is very upset. Call home. There was never an "I'm so sorry," never a "how are you," never a "we made a terrible mistake." It was all about them, their reputation, their discomfort. Their only regret was that they had been caught. They hadn't learned a thing about love or loyalty, only about the sting of public opinion. And in that moment, listening to their voices, I felt the last withered tether of familial obligation snap. I deleted the voicemails, blocked their numbers, and began the slow, painful process of looking forward instead of back. I turned my silence not into a weapon, but into a space for healing. For weeks, I let the military support system hold me. I met with Captain Rostova, the casualty assistance officer. She was a no-nonsense woman with a kind heart who guided me through the terrifying mountains of paperwork, translating the bureaucratic jargon into human language. She was my anchor in a sea of logistics. I started seeing a grief counselor twice a week, a woman who specialized in military families. In the quiet, safe space of her office, for the first time, I let myself break. I cried for Mark, for the stolen future, for the sound of his laugh that I was already starting to forget. I cried for the life we would never have, and I cried for the family I had lost long before my husband died. I grieved the mother I never had, the father I never knew, the brother who was a stranger. During this time, something unexpected was happening in the world outside my hotel room. My story, which was still circulating online, had struck a deep chord. My email, which the news station had linked to with my permission, began to fill up with messages. They were from other military widows, from Gold Star mothers, from the wives of deployed soldiers. They told me their own stories of loneliness, of feeling abandoned not just by civilians who didn't understand, but sometimes by their own families. One email, from a woman named Sarah, whose husband had been killed in Afghanistan 3 years prior, stuck with me. "Dear Hannah," she wrote, "I saw your story and I cried for a solid hour. Not just for you, but for me. I came home to an empty house. My flight got in at 2 a.m. and I didn't want to be a bother to anyone, so I didn't call my parents. I took a taxi from the airport. The driver asked me if I was coming home from a fun vacation. I sat on my luggage on the front porch for an hour because my hands were shaking too much to get the key in the lock, and I just cried. No one should have to come home alone." Her words, "no one should have to come home alone," became a mission statement. I read her email and then dozens of others like it. I realized that my experience, as uniquely painful as it felt, was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. It was a silent epidemic of loneliness in a community that was supposed to be all about support, and I was in a unique position to do something about it. With the life insurance money from Mark, money I would have traded in a second to have him back, I started a nonprofit organization. I called it the Welcome Project. Its purpose was simple and direct: to ensure that no military spouse or family member ever had to face an empty airport or an empty house alone. Using my project management skills, I built it from the ground up. I filed the paperwork, built a website, and put out a call for volunteers on the same social media platforms where my family had been condemned. The response was overwhelming. Veterans, active duty spouses, retired couples, even college kids who just wanted to help. They all signed up. Our first welcome was for a young Army wife named Maria, whose husband had died in a training accident. She was flying home with their 2-year-old son. I went to the airport myself, along with Sarah, who had become my first friend in this new life, and 2 other volunteers. We waited at the gate with a simple, hand-drawn sign that said, "Welcome home, Maria." When she stepped off the plane, holding her sleeping child, her face was a mask of exhaustion and grief. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and for a second, I saw the same fear I had felt, the fear of being utterly alone. Then she saw us. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. We didn't say much. We just hugged her. We carried her bags, entertained her son with a small teddy bear we had brought, and drove her home. We had arranged for a small group of volunteers to stock her fridge and clean her house before she arrived. We stayed with her until her own family, who lived out of state, could get there the next day. As I left her house that night, she grabbed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. I was so scared. "You have no idea what this means." "Yes, I do," I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. "I really do. That became my new life. Strangers became my family. The volunteers of the Welcome Project, the widows and spouses I met. We formed a new kind of clan. We had potlucks and holiday dinners. We created a phone tree for the bad days. We understood each other's silences, the unspoken language of our shared experience. We showed up. That was our only rule. We always showed up. My life was no longer defined by the family who had left me on the curb, but by the family I was building, one airport welcome at a time. It wasn't the life I had planned with Mark, but it was a good life. A life built on a foundation of peace, purpose, and the profound truth that real presence, not blood, is what makes a family. I never reopened that group chat. I deleted the entire thread, erasing their final, cruel words from my life. Their numbers are blocked. I heard through a cousin that they eventually sold their house and moved a few towns over, hoping to escape the shadow of their reputation. I don't know for sure. I don't care. Some bridges are not worth rebuilding. Some bridges burn themselves to the ground, and it is a blessing to let them. Have you ever been abandoned by the people who should have stood by you? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe family is who shows up.